In this video, what I'm going to do is walk through what is now lines 9 through 16 of my color function. And then I've condensed everything else in that function to be very similar to what's going on in this particular case. I'm going to ignore one line of code for the moment and save it to the next video. And that's this line right here, line number 12. That'll be a video all on its own, just talking about some mathematical arithmetic that I had to do to deal with something. But the rest of the code should be fairly straightforward, and then we'll be able to finish up looking at this Tkinter package. So I've gone and I've gotten a list of all of the entries that belong to the window, and those are grid entries, and all of those objects are frames. I've updated my cells list, which is taking a look at with that value that I got from the given entry. But what I need to do are two things. First of all, I need to update any surrounding cells that may have a new up cell, down cell, left cell, or right cell. So that's what these four if statements are, updating up cells, down cells, right cells, and left cells. And I need to be wary of if I've created any new cells that are now surrounded, because cells that have been, that are no longer surrounded, need to revert back to their normal color, and cells that are now surrounded need to be highlighted in blue. So my first check that I have on line 9 is checking whether or not the entry that I'm on has an up cell. So I'm checking to see if my row is larger than 0, because if my row is anything other than 0, then I do have an up cell. And then line 10 is just saying, well, if you have an up cell, then go to that up cell. That cell that is one row below where I'm currently at has a new down cell value. And what that down cell value is the value that we got from the user, again converted to an integer. So those are lines 9 and 10. Just check to see if you have an up cell, and if you do, update the up cell's down cell value. Line 11 is equally straightforward. It's now checking, now that I've updated something, namely, I've created a down cell value for this particular cell. Is it the case that that cell is now surrounded? That cell, is it now surrounded by this update that I've made? Because if so, what I would like to do is ultimately change a background color to blue and highlight it, which is what's happening at line 16. So all we need to cover are these couple of intermediate steps. The line we're going to ignore for the time being is line 12. What I need to do at line 12 is some magic, because my cells object is arranged as a two-dimensional thing that has rows and columns. This entries list that I've gotten is a one-dimensional thing that lacks rows and columns. And so what I'm going to need to do is convert from the coordinates that I'm given, which is a row number and a column number, to just a single number, and I need to find the right spot in this list of entries that corresponds to this up cell. So what's happening at line 12, which we'll cover in detail in the next video, is the mathematical conversion I need to do to access the right grid object in this list of entries. So if you believe that line 12 correctly does that, what line 13 does is create an object, which is a frame object, and I've called it upFrame since we're working with the upFrame in this one, which is the proper entry inside of that list that we created called entries. So I'm going to go to that entries list, I'm going to go to the correct position, and I'm going to grab the frame that exists in that spot. In line 14 now, I want to convert from a frame object, which was placed in the grid, to an entry object. It's the entry whose background color I want to change. So if you remember, each frame object was added to the window via the grid command. Each entry object was added to the frame via the pack command. So very similar to what I did in line 5, where I said go to the window, and I want all of the things that were added to the window via the grid method. I want to do that right here on line 14. Go to the frame object that I've created called upFrame, and give me a list of all of the things that were added to it via the pack command. And let's make that a list called upEntries. Now what's nice here is that the mathematical arithmetic stops at this point, because although the window had 81 frame entries, each frame just had one entry that we called label. And so I have to use this notation to get a list of all of the things that were added to the frame via the pack command, but that list is super short. In fact, it just has a single entry. There was but one entry object that was attributed to that frame. So all I have to do is go to that list, upEntries, and access the first thing in it. And the thing that I'm storing in the variable called upEntry will be an entry object, and it will be the one in the right position. Last but not least, I go to that upEntry, I access its BG component, its background component, and I change that background component to blue, which is what we do when we've surrounded things. So all of that together is the code in lines 9 through 16, which says, for the up cell, make the proper modifications. All I've done in 18 through 29 is do the same thing for down cells, left cells, and right cells, and I've just done it in a more condensed version to create fewer lines of code. But all of this is just analogous exactly to what we've written here. So for now, we're going to skip all of that code. There's just two more things to do. No matter what, now that I've entered something right here, remember that ENT is the entry object we're currently on. No matter what, we want to change its background color to a different color. And in fact, the color we want is called System Button Face, which is not a color that you would know in your rainbow spectrum, but is the automatic default color for an entry, so it will match the other ones that never had the blue highlighting to begin with. And then the very last thing in our function is we would like to check to see if we've completed the puzzle. Because if we've completed the puzzle, we want to close this window. And so I've created a function that's on the outside of this cell called isComplete. And what I do now that all of my updates have been made to cells upon this return click, I want to check, is it done now? Is the puzzle complete? And if so, then destroy the window, i.e. close it. And that's all we have to our color function.